Welcome to Civic Pulse, where we explore the issues shaping our communities with your host, Rabbi Behrman.
Thank you for joining us today. We're very honored to have Dan Garodnick, who is the chair of city planning for New York City. Dan, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about today City of Yes. And before we get into the particulars of City of Yes, I want to talk about zoning in general. So my understanding is that the first zoning resolution was introduced in 1916 in New York City. Is that accurate?
That is correct. That's correct. It has a long and storied history in New York City. First was 1916. Then the modern zoning was brought into play in 1961. And we're really operating in the rules today that were shaped in 1961. And that's why everything that we have been doing recently has been so important, because these rules are getting a little old and tired and not super productive for New York City.
So before 1916, there were no rules. You could build wherever you want.
That's right. There was not limitations. There was not any regulation as to divisions between, let's say, a place where you could build a home and a place where you could do a manufacturing business. Those rules, didn't exist until 1916.
So 1916, they introduced this zoning resolution, which I understand at that time was all about. It was about height. What was it? What was the resolution in 1916?
Yeah, there was a lot of it was about height, and some of it was about use. It was the beginning of the modern era of dividing uses, limiting heights, controlling density, where you can put things. But that really was most formalized in 1961, where we really came out with divisions, strict divisions: manufacturing zone here, residential zone here, commercial zone here, and the various tools that you could use to be able to make changes as you went, understanding that you can set out a zoning resolution, but also we're in an ever-evolving city, which needs to make change and which needs to have a level of flexibility. So there was always an opportunity to do that.
So before 1961, they took New York City and they divided it into zones: commercial, residential. Within residential, they divided it into zones.
Correct.
And then if you want to develop a property in a particular zone, right, and the zoning wasn't right, from 1961 till 2024, even now it's still this way, you'd have to come before the zoning.
Yes, it changed over time because the New York City's governing document, the city charter, was amended in 1989, which actually set out some of the rules for how you change zoning. But most importantly, the 1961 rules divided the city up into different areas where you could do different things. And yes, there was a procedure for how to make changes if it was important and necessary, and if it had public endorsement to do so. Otherwise, if you didn't need to make a change, it would define exactly what you could do and where. You could do that as a matter of rights. You could just go ahead and proceed.
As of right. So the procedure was basically they go before the DCP, and then the DCP makes a suggestion to the city council. The city council votes, and then the mayor signs off. Did I get that right?
Well, that's right today. Today, the process is, if you want to make a change to zoning, you come to the Department of City Planning. You do all the technical work necessary to be able to figure out what changes you need and want. Then you go to the City Planning Commission, which kicks off a process of evaluation, starting with the community boards, the local community board, the borough president, the borough that you're in. Then it comes back to the City Planning Commission for a public hearing and a vote, and then off to the City Council for a public hearing and a vote. So it's a pretty extensive process to be able to make changes. It's one of the reasons why people frequently, hope to be able to do whatever they need to do within existing rules, as opposed to seeking what is a very long and complicated process for change.
So we have this outdated 1961 zoning resolution, right? And you have this process to rezone. So I believe it was the mayor who came up with this idea to City of Yes to sort of update it and make it, and I think his goal was affordable housing or more housing. And what happened next?
So most importantly, the process for making change on individual sites or even in individual neighborhoods stays the same, even though we have now passed what is the biggest boost for housing supply in the city's history.
It's historic.
This
changes.
is historic. We've never done anything like what we just accomplished.
Since
The city council passed on December the 5th. Since 1961, we have never attempted it. We have never done it. And with a single action, with this City of Yes for Housing opportunity and the desire to create a little more housing in every neighborhood of New York City, we expect to deliver another 80,000 units of housing over 15 years, which is more housing than was created over 12 years of neighborhood rezonings under Mayor Bloomberg, double the number over 8 years under Mayor de Blasio, and doesn't even count our own neighborhood rezonings in this administration. So it's a very, very big boost. But most importantly, and I do want to make this point, it did not change the process that you and I were just discussing about how you make change to land use. We did this. We proposed a citywide change. It was approved by the city council. But otherwise, the rules stay in place.
But what it did change is, in some cases, you would have to go through the process. And now it's as of right for certain developments or properties. Is that correct?
What we allowed was changes that would enable things to happen that were small enough so that we believe that in individual neighborhoods, they will be small incremental changes. They're not the sorts of things that people would have ever gone through a big public process for anyway. But by doing them citywide, they have a big impact and they help us address our housing crisis, where today we're at historic lows on vacancy. We're at 1.41% vacancy rate for rental housing in New York City, which it has not been that low since 1968. And it allows us in the big picture to be able to do something really meaningful and to take direct aim at that problem.
Was there a lot of opposition to this City of Yes?
I would not call this a smooth sail through the process. No surprise there. It was big. It was ambitious. It had never been attempted before, as we discussed before. People were nervous about what it meant. And we did our very best to try to explain that at the end of the day, the sorts of changes that we were proposing in an individual neighborhood were a 3, 4, or 5-story apartment building at the very maximum in our lower density areas. Not that scary. And our 1 and 2 family districts around the city already have a lot of those buildings. They just predate the 1961 zoning resolution. These are buildings that were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s, but were made functionally impossible to build as part of modern zoning. Actually, if you look at our streetscape and our building typology in New York City today, in 1 and 2 family districts, we have 14,693 multifamily buildings. So the equivalent of these 3, 4, 5, and in some cases even bigger buildings. They are there today. They are recognized by New Yorkers. They are experienced by all of us every single day. They don't bother anybody. We have taken steps here to re-enable that sort of apartment building in specific areas, in specific circumstances. And we think that that's going to be a big help citywide.
So we're not going to see any major buildings going up or any major...
I've given you the max in a low density area, and it's really important, and I hope your listeners focus on this point, because it really is not that scary when you consider that the absolute maximum, most ambitious, low density change would be a 3-story building, 35 feet, 4-story or 5-story, and the 5-story would be in the places where you already were your highest low density neighborhood to begin with.
Right, so we actually do have a property in the district on, when I say it's not we, there is a developer that owns a property on Crown and Shroy, which my understanding is that because of the size, that property would actually be able to go up a significantly higher.
Now that example it's an interesting one because it is not in a low density area. It is in what we call a medium or high density area. So in zoning, and I hesitate to do this because we don't want people's eyes to glaze over when they start thinking about the New York City zoning resolution, but we define it in low density areas. So you think about 1, 2 family homes, smaller buildings, in some cases, a front yard, a backyard, that sort of thing. Then you have medium and high density areas where you think about, more multifamily buildings. You think about Long Island City, downtown Brooklyn, Manhattan. These are areas where you see medium and high density. The example that you're giving happens to be in a zone that is a medium to high density area.
There's apartment buildings nearby.
Right. And in that situation, what City of Yes for Housing Opportunity did was to give a bonus for affordable housing. So in that situation, there's a certain amount of development that they could do on that site as of right under the existing zoning. And through our proposal, they would be able to do a little bit more, about 20% more, if that 20% is reserved for income-restricted affordable housing. So that is an opportunity that they would be able to enjoy there, as I understand the site.
So I've been on the community board for 10 years. I recently left the board. It's getting pretty chaotic, that board, or it's always been chaotic. But we always hear from those opposing developments. They make two arguments. One argument is, I've never seen any evidence of this, but I just want to hear your thoughts, that all development, any housing equals displacement. That's one argument. And I'm sure you've heard it also.
Of course.
And the second argument, I guess, I think it's a little bit more, it resonates with me a little bit, that a lot of the affordable is not really affordable, depending on the AMI, right? And I know it happens to be in this project, I brought up Troy. My understanding is the AMI is significantly lower than he had previously. So it's going to bring down the price of rent, and those apartments are going to be affordable and cheaper, which I think is great, because I can only imagine what he's going to charge renting that property. And I know there's affordable apartments are going to be a lot cheaper and a lot more affordable to this neighborhood. But why is it that so many of these developments that have the so-called affordable apartments are almost as expensive as the market rate?
Okay, so let's talk about both issues that you raised and the ones that you hear from community members most often. The first one was about displacement. Any development equals displacement. Well, let's drill down on that a little bit as to what that means. There is primary displacement and secondary displacement. If a building is being developed on a place where somebody actually lives, that is displacement. That is a place where somebody is, and they are being displaced because there is a bigger building going there. That's not usually what people are talking about. They're usually talking about secondary displacement, because the first example is not that common. Secondary displacement is the theory that if you build anything, you're going to change the dynamic of a neighborhood and you're going to make it more expensive for the people who are there to live there. And I think that's what people are usually referring to when they say displacement. In reality, when you have a housing scarcity problem like we have in New York City, the biggest displacement risk is the absence of housing. People with resources come to find housing where they can find housing. People without resources are frequently out of luck when they're competing with people who have them. So the opportunity to prevent displacement is directly related to the need for us to create a lot more housing. And I don't mean just market rate housing, although that's important, but market rate housing, affordable housing at different levels. This is all important. We need it all and more because we have failed over many, many years to deliver the housing that New Yorkers need. And that's why there's the fear. And that's why the price of rent is so significant. That's why there's an imbalance of power between the people who live in property, in some cases, and the people who own the property in the same building. So the best way to prevent displacement is for us to actually create more housing. The second point is about the levels of affordability. Now, of course, if you have significant supply of housing, that will bring the price of housing down. Or at a minimum, it stabilizes the price of housing. We've seen this in other cities around the country and world. They create more housing and it stops the increase of housing prices, or it brings housing prices down. Either way, it is helping them from going in the direction that they have consistently been going over time. But the question about affordable housing programs, the city's own metrics for affordability, well, look, this is a complicated one. We have just created a new lower tier income level for our mandatory inclusionary housing program, so that the city council can impose that level of mandate in more areas on its own. We want to be able to create maximum amounts of affordable housing. We want to create maximum amounts of lowest income affordable housing, because we know that is, the hardest stuff to find. And we have to do it as part of this broader process, because we need to create the housing. We need to make sure that we're creating these opportunities, and we need to make it accessible to people at all income levels, because otherwise the pressures of displacement, the pressures of gentrification are all there. That's what this was all about, and that's what we're trying to address with this proposal.
Great answer. Thank you. This neighborhood struggles with housing. I mean, people are always looking for apartments. They're young couples, they get married, and sometimes they'll move into a temporary apartment until they could find a permanent apartment. So I get it. Now, one of the, I would say, for this neighborhood and for Brooklyn, and when I say the Orthodox community in Brooklyn, the Orthodox Jewish community, a lot of people live in houses, and they're R2, they're restricted, and they were never allowed to use their basements. I understand City of Yes changed that. Can you talk about that and what the process is if somebody has a basement, and until now, whatever the DOB rules, I don't even think they were allowed to have a bathroom down there or whatever it was, and now they could have a grandchild living there or a child living there or a neighbor or a tenant?
Great. Well, it's an important question, and I want to make sure that I answer it completely, because there's no magic wand on basement apartments. There's a variety of levels of jurisdiction that govern the legality of a basement apartment. So it was really important what we recently did in City of Yes for housing opportunity by allowing in zoning the possibility of using your own property for an additional accessory unit, which could be in a basement. It could be in an attic, it could be in a backyard if you have one, garage. We wanted to give New York homeowners, including homeowners in this neighborhood, the opportunity to have more flexibility on their own property. This works in lots of places in America. New York City homeowners should have the same opportunity too. Now, as it relates to basements, there are some limits in state law as to what you can do in a basement. It defines the questions about egress or heights of ceilings and things like that. So we can enable things in zoning, but they may still not be possible under state law. So the state of New York last year gave New York City the opportunity to do a pilot program to be able to allow for basement apartments to be legalized under state law. So between that opportunity, which the city is still working on rolling out, and the zoning changes we just made, we believe that there will be a match for an opportunity for people to use and to convert basement apartments into real living spaces. But this is still a work in progress as it relates to basements. There are other areas where it's a little easier, a garage or an attic. It's a little easier because they don't have the same limitations as a basement. But we understand that it's really important in this area, and the city is developing its own pilot program and own rules to be able to activate that. So I would encourage your listeners to stay tuned for more information as it relates to basements.
But there are some cases where a basement today can be legalized, right? There are some areas and some examples.
There are some existing pilot programs that exist, but they're only pilots today. So they're just trial programs.
And not everybody could participate.
No, this is not an across the board yet. And it won't be an across the board because some basements will not be able to comply with state law. Right. So we are looking.
Which is what, height, lights?
Yeah, things like that. That's right. And life safety sorts of questions, which are important. Like we don't want to legalize something which is a death trap. We want to make sure that there are safe opportunities for people to convert basements, and we have to do that thoughtfully and in ways that are consistent with state law and the opportunities the state is giving the city. Through zoning, we just legalized the possibility of using space on your lot, but there are a lot of life safety questions that remain and which the city is working to define and to roll out as part of this pilot program.
So if I understand correctly, if somebody has a basement, which state law, there are no issues the perspective of state
Okay,
law.
let's say it's good by state law. Yep.
Let's say it's good by state law, right? Is there a process now, or they still have to wait for this process to play out?
Well, there is no process right now because we have not defined what is consistent with state law in New York City. So there is an extra step that needs to happen before people can legalize their own basements. But this is all coming soon. And it's coming soon because only within the last 12 months did we have the power in New York City to legalize basements as a pilot program from the state of New York. And only since December 5th of 2024 were they able to be legalized through zoning. So we are now marching toward the process of legalization of basement apartments, but there are some extra rules that need to be written for that to actually be practical for homeowners in this area or anywhere in New York City.
Who's writing these laws? Is this something that goes again through the city council? Is this the DCP? How does this work?
No, these would be rules that are written through the Department of Buildings and not through the Department of City Planning and through HPD, Housing Preservation and Development. But these are all coming soon.
And it's a priority. They want it.
Of course, like this is a great way for us to be able to give homeowners flexibility and also to create housing, which is a fundamental goal.
So why don't we talk about something that did change? Because I think if somebody has a garage, they're an R2 lot, they have a garage, they want to renovate it and put in a bathroom, put in a bedroom. When their grandchildren come to town, they want to give them a place to live, to stay. Can that happen?
It can. And now that we have passed this proposal, we can make it possible for New York City homeowners who have a garage and want to add an extra unit for in-laws or children to be able to do so. The Department of Buildings would be the one approval necessary to be able to do that. And we hope people explore that as a possibility now knowing that it has been legalized.
Is it size? Are there size requirements? Are there?
Yes. There is a limitation on 800 square feet. The Department of Buildings will have its own, standards as to what you need to have to be able to be legal in New York City. But this is a possibility now. So people should explore that and consider what works for them and their families and how to make it, a real opportunity for them.
What happens if you don't have a garage? You have a backyard. You could also build a...
Yes, you can. If you want, again, it's a limitation of 800 square feet. So garage, if you want to build an accessory unit in the backyard, attic, basement, subject to the limitations that we discussed before. These are all possibilities now as a result of the City Council's action and our proposal in City of Yes for housing opportunity.
Even in zoning, which would otherwise single-family homes.
Correct. That's right. R1 to R5. Some limitations in flood-prone areas, but otherwise there is an opportunity to add an accessory dwelling unit in all low-density areas across New York City since December.
Now you can't live in an attic. I mean, this neighbor doesn't have attics really, so that's
right. That's right. I mean, you can live in your own attic if you want to put a bed up in your own attic and sleep there. That's up to you. But if you want to use it as a place that is actually recognized as its own unit, you need to make you would have needed to make certain changes to it, and now those are able to be legalized in New York City.
Well, I should have said this at the beginning. Congratulations! It's
Thank you.
Historic City of Yes.
Thank you.
Since in 100 years, and we have a custom of saying if the Messiah doesn't come in 100 years, they'll be talking about City of Yes in the books of history and in the books of law. They'll be teaching it in universities across the country, right?
I think that's right. We've been talking about our housing crisis in New York City for so long and the price of housing. People have just come to take it as a fact of life. But with this proposal, we said, and we put up our foot in the ground, we said, we don't need to live this way. And we made such a significant change in New York City that I think people will look back at 2024 as the year that we turned the tide on housing in New York City. And yes, I think that people will mark this as the moment when things started to turn around.
Now, the original plan proposed, what happened was your commission created this plan, right? Obviously with community input. I participated in multiple meetings where you reached out to the community here, what their concerns are and to brief them. And then you went to the community boards. Then you brought it to the city council. The city council said, hold it. We like it, but we want to make some changes. They made their changes, they voted, and we are where we are today, right?
Correct.
Now, can you give an example of a change that was made in the city council and maybe some of the reasoning why that, or I don't need you to argue for them, but the reasoning they gave for making these changes?
Sure. I can give you an example. In fact, I did even just a minute ago about accessory dwelling units in areas that are prone to coastal flooding. That was something that was a real concern to the city council, and I think that was something that was very reasonable. That they wanted to make some limitations to the applicability for, let's say, basement accessory dwelling units in flood-prone areas. They made some limitations to the availability of those 3, 4, 5-story apartment buildings near transit, based on, if they were primarily lower density areas. They made some limits to the applicability of where you could do those sorts of things. Those are a couple of examples, but I will say, and a great credit to the city council here, this was a hard thing to do. It was an ambitious thing to do. Speaker Adams and her colleagues, they stepped up. They made it very clear that they wanted to do an important and meaningful thing on housing. And they fundamentally embraced this proposal. They made changes, but the proposal, each component of the proposal that started remained at the end of the day. And as somebody who served in the city council for 12 years, I recognize how hard it is to take a step like that, to look at the big picture while there's frequently, lots of local concern, some of it, deeply held belief, some of it just a misunderstanding of what was, being proposed. But either way, it doesn't matter. It's hard regardless. And council members, who came out and supported this thing took a hard vote, to their credit. And, I think we should celebrate that.
And I saw after the City of Yes passed, it was applauded by almost every elected official in New York from all political spectrums. It was largely applauded. One of the concerns this neighborhood had was parking, because we're suffering from a lack of parking. And I think when we went down to the meetings, community meetings, the arguments I heard from the city really was something like, you have a choice of housing and parking, and sometimes housing is a greater priority than parking. Do you expect to see a major change now in parking or availability for parking
in most parts of the city? I would say no. I do not expect to see dramatic changes. In areas where you're really close to a subway station, where we were requiring that you build 50% parking for the units in that building, which were not desired by the developer and not really consistent with New York City's own policy goals. Those are the places where I think people will make different decisions based on the facts and reality that they're seeing. What we had experienced for many years was our zoning resolution defines within an inch of its life how much minimum parking you must provide in every development, in every zoning district, in every corner of New York City. That's a minimum. You can always go above the minimum, but it was a minimum mandate. And we saw many circumstances in which a builder would start, when making their plans, and figure out, okay, how am I going to deal with the parking situation? And then figure out how many units of housing they could do secondarily. We want them to be able to have more flexibility, to be able to focus on housing, put the primacy on housing, and to make sure that parking is provided where it's needed. Some buildings simply are not marketable if they don't have parking. In some neighborhoods, you better provide parking or you're going to be out of luck if you're putting in a new building there. I understand that. I see that. I see that all the time and in many neighborhoods of the city. That does not mean the city needs to mandate it for it to happen. So we had proposed, even more changes than ultimately resulted in the council, but we think that we landed in a really good place. The areas which are closest to the core, Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, Long Island City, areas that have great access to transit, you no longer have a mandate. If you want to put in parking, you can. In other areas, there's still requirements, and in areas truly far afield from mass transit opportunities, the rules stayed basically the same. So this is everybody's favorite topic to talk about, parking. Everybody has a view on this one. We think we landed in a really good place, and we think that it was a fair outcome, and we think it will work and help us to create housing while also not creating additional headaches or harms for drivers or people who need a car because they don't have good access to mass transit.
Thank you very much. Any closing statements?
Listen, I'm just happy to be here. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you about all the work we're doing. So thank you for having me.
So I just want to close that the reason why I started this podcast, you're a former council member, and I looked at 2013 when de Blasio ran for mayor and Lori Cumbo ran for city council, your former colleague, Commissioner Cumbo, and I saw that about 450 people turned out to vote, which is nothing. 2021, we had this huge campaign to get out the votes, and Mayor Adams ran and Councilmember Hudson ran, and it was a little bit of a contentious city council race, And I think it was like 2,900 people in the 43rd district came out to vote. And I even compared numbers of who voted in 13 and who voted in 21 that could have voted in 13 but didn't, and who was newly registered. And I saw there was about a 200% increase in voters that could have voted in 13 but chose not to, but did vote in 21. And then I saw it was about a 400% increase if you include newly registered, which that's huge, unprecedented. And we're seeing in Crown Heights a change. People are coming out and voting in large numbers. I think we had about 5,600 people that voted since 2020 in the Orthodox Jewish community of Crown Heights. I'm not including the November race. We still don't have those numbers yet from the state, from the city. They're behind. But that's a huge difference. And one of the challenges is that people, they want to know why we vote. What's the purpose? And I think City of Yes is an example of how lives are going to be changed, whether it's for good, more affordable housing, whether somebody now could change their basement into a unit, build an extra unit in their backyard. These are all changes which are going to impact people. And it's so important that both we vote and that we remain engaged. Like there was a process. You reached out to community leaders, to community boards, and people had an opportunity to have input and to write these laws and to change these laws, which are going to affect hundreds of thousands of people in the next 10 years. So thank you so much for joining us on short notice, and thank you for everything you do, and look forward to great changes in New York.
Well, thank you again for having me. I appreciate it.